And in particular, welcome, Conley Tyler. It's a pleasure to have you here, and it's a pleasure to do something together again with the Australian Institute of International Affairs. I want to apologize for the delay. There were some technical problems, but luckily, Spiros here managed to solve everything. So I think we should definitely thank also for xeroxing the slides. So now we're all ready. And Melissa Conley Tyler is National Executive Director of the AIIA, and I think you've been in that position for about 7 years now. And you're certainly one of the dynamic elements at the AIIA, which, as I understand, has been there for about 90 years. That's what you were telling me, so it's an old, very prestigious institution. And Melissa is a lawyer and a specialist in conflict resolution. And she was previously program manager of the International Conflict Resolution Center at the University of Melbourne and senior fellow of Melbourne Law School. And Melissa was selected as one of the nation's 1,000 best writers to participate in the Australia 2020 summit convened by the Prime Minister to discuss future challenges facing Australia. In 2008, she was selected to receive the Young Alumni Award for Most Outstanding Graduate of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, under 40. And we have commented with, I guess, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which is a very, very well-known school in the United States. And also you're a member of the International Advisory Council of the U.S. Center for Citizen Diplomacy, to show that the network certainly spans beyond Australia. And so it's a pleasure to listen to you talk about ASEM. There have been, well, we've talked a bit about ASEM, so there are many different viewpoints about ASEM. You know, some say that it's a talk shop, some say that it's much more than that. Some would also say that talk shops are very important, but we're going to hear it from an expert on ASEM. And I think you have even more time to prepare now. So this is going to be a wonderful speech. So welcome, and I suppose we'll talk about 14 minutes, something like this, and then we'll open up for discussion. And as Jajit asked a little bit before the hour, so you have time to go to another class for those of you who are in Jajit Play's class and mine as well. And I also told Melissa that there's a lot more students listening in, so then they have to imagine the virtual students as well. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak. I'm sorry I'm sitting down today. I had surgery earlier this week, so I'm not able to say much. We'll try to still talk to all of you. So my topic today is going to be ASEM. Can I just get a sense from the people in the room? Who'd heard of ASEM before you did this course, before you came to university? Yeah? Now, who thinks their parents have heard of ASEM? My feeling is that ASEM is in general a pretty low-profile organisation. If you looked at something like G20, even APEC, with all of those silly shirts, it gets a lot more attention than ASEM does. The only thing I think ASEM might win out on is academic attention, because so many people are interested in it, as an example for interregionalism. Yeah. Is it coming through okay? So what I'm going to be talking about is ASEM looking first at its structure and functioning. How does it work as an organisation? And I'll try to give you a bit of background on that, because it's not always easy to get that information. I'm then going to try and put that in the context of regionalism and the different ideas of regionalism in both Europe and in Asia. And then I'll finish up by looking at the current work of ASEM, and in particular, how do we judge its success? And I'll be focusing on the period since Australia's been a member over ASEM 8 in Brussels and ASEM 9 upcoming in Vientiane in Laos. So I'll start off with some of the facts and figures about ASEM. And from the first summit, you'll see here in 1996, and up to the Brussels summit in 2010. And I like these photos because they give you a sense of the twin but different ideas of sumptuousness that you get in Europe and in Asia. So if you're going to say what is ASEM broadly, it's a non-binding association of European and Asian states for dialogue. And it comes basically from this idea, which was originally promoted from Singapore and France, that you want to help Asia and Europe have better connections. You want them to have better awareness of each other. It has a very strong idea on this concept of dialogue, connections between religions, and it has an unusually wide remit because it has the three pillars. It's looking at economic, it's looking at political, and it's looking at social and cultural as its three pillars. Now, this differs quite a lot from other international organisations. If you think of something like G20, focused on finance is absolute core, or AIIA, focused on trade, or the ASEM Regional Forum, focused on security. You can have a range of different organisations that focus on different things. Here you've got a very wide-ranging organisation that looks at all three pillars. I think it's also somewhat unusual in the level of informality. There's no treaty, there's no charter, there's nothing that anyone has to sign up to. They don't even have to turn up each year. Well, every 2 years. I mean, they're invited to and welcome to, but they don't always. It depends on what's happening domestically and politically and whether the leaders decide they want to come. There's no secretariat for ASEM, although it's perennially being proposed by some countries or another as something to try to give more of an institution, but it's regularly resisted. And there's this idea of informality, dialogue, building relationships as the absolute core of what ASEM is about. So the main features are the leaders' meetings, which happen every 2 years, alternating between Asia and Europe. You then have ministerial level summits, so you have foreign ministers, finance ministers meeting at that level. And then you have officials meetings, and they can be very useful because they're working on technical issues, but ones which can be solved. And as I say, a very wide range of topics can be covered. Because there are the three pillars, the economic, social and political, you can be covering almost any topic. Now, the highest profile bit, of course, is the leader summit. And I put there, I found every single one of those logos, which is not as, this is why I really need my slides, you can see every logo. But you've got here from Bangkok, London, Seoul, Copenhagen, Hanoi, Helsinki, Beijing, Brussels, and the upcoming one from Vientiane. And not surprisingly, they get the most attention. All of those leaders together is a significant thing on the international stage. But I think you also find that the ministerial level and the official level is very useful. And a lot of the, if you think of it in that way, the real work is done at this level. In international summitry, you would generally expect that the leaders' summit level will deal with things that need political resolutions, where the highest level coming in, reaching some political compromise is going to be useful. When you're looking at things that need information sharing or things that are technical, where you need a technical solution to a problem, you'll tend to be doing that at the officials level or at the minister's level. And you can see here there's a somewhat complex structure of the various meetings that take place. Now, for my mind, I think the most interesting thing about ASEM is its membership. And it's really unusual in the world of international organisations in the membership it has. So I'm telling you that this is my hint. There are currently 48 members. Can you turn to the person near you and see how many of those you think can do it? Give you just a couple of minutes to see how many of the 48 do you think you could guess of which of the countries in the world make up that 48. So find a nice person next to you. Start scribbling, see how many of the 48 is the right one. Start with the 27 EU member states, that's a good help. Anyone think they got 48? Okay, so how many do you think you've got? I'll just ask around. Close to 40? No, of course, the trick is you've got the handout, you can read. I hope no one works that out. This is the answer. And I'm interested, did anyone work out Mongolia? I don't know if you would necessarily look at Mongolia. What about India? No, they're not in APEC, they are here. Pakistan? Does Pakistan feel like Asia? Yes? No? I mean, interesting ones there. And there might be others you might have thought could be in but aren't, like North Korea, not in. Or Papua New Guinea, which is in APEC but not in ASEM. And of course, this has happened over quite a long time. This hasn't been an immediate thing. We started off with an ASEM in 1996, which was only 15 years. 15 EU member states, ASEM member states. And then, of course, you have enlargement of both groups. You have EU enlargement, which is going to change it. You also have ASEAN enlargement with the three ASEAN members. The most recent enlargement has been in 2010, and that's when we got in. On the third attempt, by the way, Australia has been blocked for a long time on this, mainly by Malaysia, by the recalcitrant Dr. Mahathir, because I think we deserve to place, which there it is. But in the last few years, it's become clear that the view towards Australia changed a lot, that there was not opposition within the Asian group to having Australia join, and so we were able to join. However, initially we had to join in the third category. There was a temporary third category set up for Australia, New Zealand and Russia. And it's interesting, one of the questions was, do we really want to be joining if we're not actually being allowed into Asia? Our idea of positioning ourselves within Asia. Interestingly, it wasn't about Australia and New Zealand. There were no issues from the Asian group about letting Australia and New Zealand in. It was about Russia. Russia, of course, has an argument geographically to be part of either or Asia. It covers both. But the European members have been very clear that the E bit in ASEM is EU. It's not Europe as in general, non-EU members, it's just EU members. Therefore, Russia could not join on the European side. But Asia wasn't at all sure that Russia should be joining on the Asian side. So at that point, no agreement could be reached, and Australia, New Zealand and Russia all came into the third category. What it's worth, I personally thought that would never move. I thought we would be stuck in temporary third category forever, but through some wonderful diplomacy from DFAT, we've actually managed to move ourselves and New Zealand and Russia all into the Asian category. As I say, I think the membership is really one of the most interesting things of ASEM, and this diagram I really love, although it is a complete dog's breakfast of a diagram, it gives you an idea of the different overlapping memberships and what that looks like. For international summits, really the key thing about them tends to be who's at the table. Countries have a choice of where they push particular initiatives. They're usually members of a number of different organisations, and so they have a choice about which summit they're going to use for particular ends. The right composition for your international organisation is vital. If you think of sort of Darwinian terms, the rise of the fittest international organisations, the ones that have the right composition are generally the ones that really endure. So if you look at something like APEC, you would say it's really been hindered in many ways by including Latin American countries, by including Chile, Peru and Mexico. That has made it a rather odd fish in the international system. It's not an automatic and reasonable grouping. It also doesn't include India, and that's a real concern for something like APEC. By contrast, something like the East Asia Summit, I think, is now about right. It's ASEAN +3, and now with the addition of Russia and the US, it actually is the right composition, I think, to talk about the range of issues in what we think of as the Asian region. So, that right composition is very important. So, ASEM, as you can see here, ASEM really stands out for a very unusual composition. This is not what you'd expect. It has an exceptionally wide membership. It's much bigger than any of those others, than APEC and G20, etc. It also has this interregionalism, and that is very, very rare. As I say, APEC has a little bit of it because it goes into Latin America, but at the time at least that was seen as being part of the same Pacific region. So it's not exactly the same idea, but this experiment, as it were, in interregionalism in ASEM is very unusual. I think some of the key features of ASEM are also unusual. So it is very much an open forum. There's no preordained agenda. It covers a wide range of issues. So it has the economic, the social and the political pillars. It's based on an equal partnership, on all members of the dialogue being equal. And it covers quite a spectrum, all the way from the leaders' meeting, the summit level, down to work of the AIIA-Europe Foundation in Singapore, which does a lot of work on people-to-people links, educational links, etc. So all of those things make it somewhat unusual. I think the Asian-Europe Foundation, what its work is, one of the really tangible expressions of what ASEM is supposed to be about. It has a range of projects that have really focused on people-to-people contact, whether that's educational exchange, interfaith dialogue, work on sustainable development, whatever it is. And that's been a real contribution that it's been able to make. So this area, ASEM and regionalism, I suspect many of you are much more expert than I on this, but I just want to draw out the differing ideas of regionalism which are seen in both Europe and Asia. And if we think of regions as imagined communities in that sense, there can be very different ideas about what regionalism is in each of the communities, which then will of course affect the interregional growth. So if you look at the idea of Asian regionalism, well, many organisations overlapping. ASEAN is the centre, and that's very much the core idea. As you can see, for example, to the reaction to former Prime Minister Rudd's Asia Pacific community, where Australia seemed to be taking the lead in institution building in Asia, and that was seen as absolutely forbidden. We could never be able to do that because ASEAN is the centre of all institution building in the region. But if you look at the way ASEAN actually works, well, you don't have economic integration. There is work towards free trade area. It's on track, I think, broadly. But you don't have economic integration. You have a very limited security community. You have a very wide variety of members. You have capitalist and communist members. You have democracies, but you also have very partial democracies, and you have monarchies, and you have a very, very wide group. And if I was going to give some real-life examples, just say in the last year, you've had armed hostilities between two ASEAN members with the Thai-Cambodia border disputes over temporary fair here. You have ongoing territorial disputes between ASEAN members in the South China Sea, some of which do cause real issues, and you have a real lack of coordinated mission. If you imagine the difference it would be if ASEAN was working as a bloc in their negotiations with China over South China Sea issues, it'd be completely different, but they don't. They are all working against each other on their own national positions. You had, in the last ASEAN summit, there was no agreed communique. This is the first time in ASEAN history. This was considered a bit of a shock. And after Cambodia was unable to achieve that, Indonesia went down in a flurry of last-minute diplomacy and did get an agreed one. But, you look at that and say, that's, again, not exactly altogether. And one that I particularly like, just as an example, is nuclear trade within the ASEAN countries. So a number of ASEAN countries are looking at nuclear power generation, particularly Vientiane, which is definite, Malaysia, which is very probable, and Indonesia, which is likely, all moving along. There's no coordinated position, there's no discussion about it. So Malaysia is happily building up its plans to build a nuclear reactor not very far from a couple of other ASEAN states, and again, no coordination with that sort. So, the ASEAN style is a different sort of regionalism, and it contrasts very strongly with the EU style of regionalism. You have single market, you have a body of norms such as democracy, which is non-negotiable. You have an idea of pooled sovereignty on a number of issues, supranational institutions. And I think there's the argument that with the current crisis, interestingly, pushes towards further integration rather than the opposite. You see increased fiscal integration rather than in dissolution. So there seems to be a very strong sense of the normative foundations of EU regionalism. And we've just put up some ideas around that. And I really do think that idea of the sort of regulatory regionalism of the EU just contrasts so strongly with the ASEAN like, with the informality, the non-interference, with the consensus. And in that context, I have to say I wouldn't be surprised if you'd find that this interregional dialogue would be somewhat difficult. There are genuinely different ideas of what that looks like. You do see that to some extent in ASEM. You see, for example, that the EU has all of its positions coordinated in ASEM. It's not done by individual member states. There are meetings within the category beforehand. They agree on a coordinated position and that goes forward. In the ASEAN, the Asia category, that is not so much because obviously they're not all part of the same group. They're not even part of that. So what I want to focus on to finish up is looking at ASEM's performance and focusing particularly over Australia's time in ASEM over the last 20 years. So looking from Brussels to Vientiane. And I think this really comes down to that number of do you call this a successful organisation or not. And to me that says what are the objectives? What are you judged against? So the initial objectives were actually very modest. Develop close and personal contacts between nations and European leaders, promote greater cooperation. And that was coming from very similar drivers from both sides. Europe saw rising economic power of Asia, clearly, and continued since that time, and thought, we need better links. We don't have enough links, we need better links. And from the Asian side, they see at that point a relatively closed European Union and think, we want to build out this as well. So in everybody's objectives, works very well. Let's see what we can do to promote dialogue, discussion, connection, and in particular, relationships. And that was a very big part of it. But over time, and this always happens, any international institution is set up and over time it gathers all of these great expectations around it. A lot of other ideas have come up. And the question is how realistic some So there's this idea that it can be a facilitator of dialogue, that it can, where there are issues where Europe and Asia are not agreeing, this can be a place, a laboratory for new ideas, which can break deadlocks, which can move things forward. Can something like ASEM be the solution to different views on climate change? Can it be the thing that opens up all of trade? Can it be the thing that helps with regulation of the international financial system? And so there's all of those, I think, really quite large expectations that some commentators put on something like ASEM and then say, is it doing that? So what are the results? And I think depending upon which of those set of objectives you look at, you get different results. I was quite amused by this quote that Eric found, the idea that in terms of academic study, ASEM may have achieved the biggest results of anything. But broadly, I'd be saying that you can see the scholars who are looking at the success of ASEM in two camps. You can see people who say it's achieved a reasonable amount, basically. It's been able to be flexible, come up with a lot of different initiatives. It's got a good framework for cooperation. It allows heads of state to meet and come up with common ground, and all of this is useful. And that's really what we're saying. It's useful. Okay? Not bigger claims than that, just it's doing something. On the other side, you might be saying, well, yes, it's somewhat useful, but how much is it achieving? It doesn't have a secretariat, so it has sort of no ongoing institutional personality. Each host takes it over, and depending upon how much the host does or doesn't do, you'll end up with a very different result. You don't have common Asian positions. You don't have binding decisions. Great to have the white membership, but how much does it achieve? And I think both of those are perfectly reasonable and respective. It depends on what you think ASEM's objectives are and what it should be achieving. To give an Australian view on this, I think it's not at all surprising that Australia wanted to be involved in ASEM. Australia sees Asia and sees Europe as absolutely key regions for its foreign policy interests. So it's a no-brainer in that sense that Australia would want to be involved if it's allowed to be in an institution like ASEM. And that fits in with, I suppose, this broader idea of having a seat at the table. And this activism of power, Australia being a joiner, Australia wanting to be part of any institution that will let us in, because that gives us another place, another platform, another mode of access to pursue our foreign policy objectives. And I think, as I say, that's completely in accord with Australian foreign policy in all areas over a long period to want that. At a very practical level, it's an opportunity to meet with leaders, for our leader to meet with other leaders. In particular, for some of the people coming to ASEM, we don't have any other obvious opportunities to meet with them. So we aren't members of any other institutions which overlap. Therefore, it's a great way, particularly for some of those European leaders, to get together. So one of the big things Australia does is have all of these bilateral side meetings. Yes, we're going to ASEM, but really what we're doing is having X number of bilateral meetings with all of the other leaders who are there on particular topics of interest. And that's one of the key things for any summit that occurs. We then work at the ministerial and the officials level, and that can be useful. There's a range of specific initiatives we've been involved in. We've been involved in some of the ASEM interfaith dialogue, which we consider we have particular expertise in. Some of the work that we do within Australia and local communities and interfaith dialogue. We see the value of things like the human rights dialogue that ASEM works on. And there have been some really specific and probably somewhat technical things, but nonetheless useful things like ASEM's been doing some work on harmonising educational qualifications between European and Asian institutions. You know, that's the sort of thing we want to be involved in. We've got a very strong education sector in this country. And you know, as you can see, you want your educational qualifications to harmonise with others so that you have portability. So there's a number of initiatives we get involved in. Working with those Asian officials is also an important thing for us. So one of the interesting things for Australia is now that we're in the Asian category, and that's only been recently, we're in this third category, but we're now in this Asian category since March. It means we work with the different ministries of foreign affairs in the Asian countries. And in both Australia and in the Asian countries, this is located within their European division of their ministries of foreign affairs. So it means that the Australians who think about Europe are also working with the Chinese who think about Europe, and each of the ASEAN members who think about Europe, etc., all across. And that's actually quite useful to be sitting alongside our Asian neighbours and seeing how they're seeing Europe, how they're seeing the world, and building those connections. That's been a useful thing for us. Another thing that's been very helpful has been, I suppose, the link with the G20 agenda. Australia is promoting G20 very strongly. We see this as one of our biggest opportunities to have a seat at the really big table in international discussions. One of the greatest threats to the G20 is a sense of lack of legitimacy because it's a club. You know, it's a self-selecting club of countries who have decided to coordinate their domestic regulation for a range of reasons. And the way to build the legitimacy is a lot of outreach. So Australia is very committed to working with non-G20 countries to give them a voice and some say in what's happening in G20. And interestingly, we've seen ASEM is one of the ways that we do that. That will reach out to non-G20 countries in this. And we also use ASEM as a way of pushing G20 agenda. You know, there's various things on the G20 agenda at the moment, everything from AIIA reform, some of the agricultural initiatives that we've been pushing very strongly, things like remittances, which are very important to development in Asia. So we have a range of initiatives that we're pushing, which we can also put from the G20 agenda into this agenda. So I think there's a lot there, and I've got a quote there, which I think is the absolute standard line from Steve Smith, the Minister for Foreign Affairs. This is absolutely Australia's national interest. Now, the slight fly in the ointment was the Prime Minister's, I think, infamous statement when she attended the ASEM 8 in Brussels, when she was saying that, you know, these international summits aren't really her thing. She'd rather be back in Australia, in school hall, thinking about teaching kids to read. Now, this, of course, was very much for domestic consumption, one assumes. That presumably was about distinguishing herself from her jet-setting predecessor and showing that she was grounded and focused on domestic problems, but I still don't think it was a bit unfortunate. However, I can say very clearly that does not reflect the enthusiasm that is coming from the government. The winning, for example, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, you know, there is a clear agenda and enthusiasm for us and what can be done. And this idea of making the most of Australia's membership, which is our general idea. If we're going to be part of something, we want to contribute, we want to make the most of having a seat at the table. Now, that said, Australia doesn't think that it's a perfect institution by any means. We didn't like being in the third category, not surprisingly, which really sort of undercut the whole idea of saying this is Australia being part of Asia, but we're sort of not, we're in this third category. So it was very important to get out of that. And from my side, I think it was a real achievement for a Commonwealth to get out of that third category, because it meant we had to convince everyone to take Russia, and obviously achieved on that. So that was good. So I think that was a real diplomatic success. It means Australia is now in the North, East and South Asia group of the Asian category, along with China, India, Japan, Pakistan, Mongolia, New Zealand. Since March, we've been part of that group, and it means that we're part of the coalition Before that, we had been a little bit on the outer, we were in the third category, so we're still finding our way a little bit in there. One of the big things Australia is pushing is seeing how we can improve the summer process. At the moment, it's very much UN style, as in each leader has a prepared 5-minute statement which the leader reads. And when we were talking about this dialogue idea, that doesn't seem completely in sync, does it? But we should be doing something that's a little bit more exciting.